The ballroom shimmered beneath 1,000 crystal lights, each chandelier refracting brilliance across polished marble floors. Waiters in black tuxedos glided between tables, their silver trays balanced with champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. It was the kind of event Clara Lee had only seen in glossy magazines and evening built on excess, curated to impress the most demanding of New York's elite. She clutched her slim black clutch tighter and reminded herself to breathe. She didn't belong here, not really. Yet tonight, she wasn't just Clara from Queens, the ambitious daughter of 2 immigrant parents who'd worked double shifts so she could attend college. Tonight, she was Clara Lee, creative director at Horizon Media, the woman tasked with reshaping the public image of Storm Enterprises. Her eyes scanned the glittering crowd, hunting for the man whose name carried weight in every corner of Wall Street. She had rehearsed the introduction in her head 100 times, but when she finally turned and saw him, Adrian Storm, the words evaporated. He was taller than she expected, his presence commanding even from across the room. The tailored navy suit hugged broad shoulders, and his dark hair was combed back with effortless precision. Yet what struck her most wasn't the power he exuded, but the shadow in his eyes. People said Adrian had everything: money, influence, legacy. But Clara caught something else in his gaze, a loneliness sharp enough to cut glass. As if sensing her stare, Adrian turned. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and for a fleeting second, Clara felt a jolt in her chest, like static before a storm. She looked away too quickly, bumping into a waiter. A glass of champagne wobbled, tipped, and before she could stop it, splash. Golden liquid spilled across her pale dress. "Damn it," she whispered, fumbling for a napkin. Here, a deep voice cut through the din. Clara looked up, and there he was. Adrian Storm stood directly in front of her, a folded handkerchief extended toward her trembling hands. Up close, he was devastating. Sharp jawline, eyes the color of storm clouds before rain, and a quiet intensity that seemed to swallow the noise of the room. She stammered, "I am so sorry. That was completely my fault." A faint smile ghosted across his lips. "You didn't spill it on me." "No apology necessary." His voice carried a low timbre, measured and calm, but there was a weight beneath it, like words carefully chosen to hide more than they revealed. Clara dabbed at her dress, cheeks burning. She wanted to vanish into the marble floor, but instead, she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Thank you. I'm Clara Lee, Horizon Media." Something flickered in his expression: curiosity, maybe even recognition. "The woman hired to fix my company's image." "Yes." She straightened, trying to summon her professional poise. "It's an honor to be here, Mr. Storm." "Adrian," he corrected smoothly. Then his gaze lingered, longer than appropriate. "You look nervous." She laughed awkwardly. "Is it that obvious?" Only to someone who's spent years pretending not to be. The honesty in his remark disarmed her. For a moment, Clara forgot the champagne stain spreading across her dress, forgot the intimidating wealth around her. All she saw was a man who, despite everything, carried emptiness in his silence. "Maybe we should get you a fresh drink," Adrian suggested. Motioning toward the bar, Clara hesitated. She hadn't expected to be speaking with him so soon, let alone walking beside him through a sea of high society. As they moved together, whispers trailed in their wake. People noticed Adrian Storm with anyone, let alone a woman new to his circle. Clara felt the scrutiny, sharp and unkind. But she lifted her chin. At the bar, Adrian ordered her a sparkling water, without asking. It was a small detail, but Clara caught it. He wasn't the type to assume champagne would solve anything. He seemed like the type who noticed everything and trusted nothing. "So," he said, leaning against the counter, "tell me, Ms. Lee, why should I trust you with my company's reputation when I don't even know if I can trust my own board?" Clara blinked. It wasn't flirtation. It was a test. His tone was cool, clinical, like a man accustomed to masks and motives. but she refused to shrink. Because, she answered steadily, I don't work for your board. I work for the truth. And the truth is, people don't see the real you, Mr. Storm. They see headlines, numbers, scandals. My job is to remind them you're more than that. Something dangerous sparked in his eyes. And what makes you so sure I am more than that? The challenge hung between them. Clara's heart hammered, but she didn't look away. Because I've built my career on telling authentic stories. And every instinct in me says you're hiding yours. For the first time, Adrian's mask cracked. Just a fraction, but it was there. A tightening of his jaw. A flicker of pain. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. He sipped his drink, gaze shifting to the crowd. You're bold, he murmured. That's rare in this room. Or reckless, Clara countered, her lips curling into a defiant smile. Adrian let out a low chuckling, expected, rich, and almost reluctant. Around them, the party roared on, but in that small pocket of space, Clara felt the beginning of something she couldn't name. She didn't know that behind Adrian's guarded charm lay a history soaked in betrayal. Deals cut in shadows, and debts owed to people who never forgave. She didn't know that Victoria Hale, his past confidant and current threat, watched them from across the ballroom, her red lips curving into a smile as sharp as a blade. And Adrian Storm didn't know that this woman with fire in her eyes, this Clara Lee, who dared to stand her ground, would soon force him to confront every secret he had buried. For now, though, it was just a spilled glass of champagne, a stranger's handkerchief, and the storm waiting quietly in his eyes. Clara woke the next morning still replaying the scene from the gala in her head. The spilled champagne, the handkerchief, the way Adrian Storm had looked at her with eyes that seemed to hold storms of their own. She told herself it was just a chance encounter, one of those fleeting moments that happened in glossy rooms filled with people who would never remember her name. But she couldn't lie to herself. Adrian remembered her. She knew it in her bones. And that thought alone made her both nervous and strangely exhilarated. By 9 a.m., she was in the gleaming lobby of Storm Enterprises, a tower of glass and steel that pierced the New York skyline. Everything about the building screamed precision and power, reflective surfaces. Minimalist art, the kind of silence that came from money cushioning every sound. Clara adjusted her blazer, smoothed her skirt, and reminded herself she was here on business, not to get lost in fantasies about the enigmatic billionaire who ran this empire. Ms. Lee, a receptionist greeted, smiling professionally. Mr. Storm is expecting you. 25th floor. Her heart gave a traitorous leap. She forced a nod and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, she caught her reflection in the mirrored walls. Not bad, she told herself. She looked like a woman who belonged here. Whether she felt like it or not was another story. When the elevator opened, Adrian was already waiting. He stood at the end of the corridor, hands in his pockets, shoulders squared in a charcoal suit that looked like it had been tailored in silence by someone who understood power better than words. Ms. Lee, he said, voice low, steady. Welcome to Storm Enterprises. The professional greeting might have passed for polite indifference, but Clara caught the flicker of recognition in his eyes, and something else, something heavier, like a man already calculating every word, every move. Thank you, Mr. Storm. She smiled, determined not to let her nerves show. I'm excited to get started. Adrian, he corrected, just as he had at the gala. The corner of her lips curved. Adrian, then. He motioned her into his office, a cavern of glass walls and dark wood overlooking the skyline. It was beautiful, but impersonal. Everything about it seemed designed to keep people at a distance. Tell me, Adrian began, settling into his chair, what do you see when you look at this company? It wasn't a question about profits or brand image. It was a test. Clara felt it instantly. She walked slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, studying the city sprawled beneath them, I see a giant, she said finally. But a giant who's let other people write his story. Right now, Storm Enterprises is defined by rumors and numbers on a balance sheet. People know what you do. They don't know who you are. Adrian's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. And who am I, Ms. Lee? She turned to face him, holding his gaze. That's what we're going to show them. For a long moment, silence stretched. Then, to her surprise, Adrian leaned back and allowed the faintest smile. Not warmth exactly, but a concession. You're bold, he murmured, echoing his words from the night before. And you like bold? She countered. That time, the smile deepened just slightly. Perhaps. The meeting moved forward, full of schedules, marketing proposals, and projections. Yet beneath it all, Clara sensed undercurrents, his sharp questions. The way he observed her reactions, the guarded pauses before he revealed anything of himself. He was a man who built walls out of glass. You could see through them, but never step past them. When the meeting ended, Adrian stood, extending a hand. His grip was firm, steady, yet she felt something electric rippled through her. We'll see if your instincts are worth the investment. Clara held her head high. I intend to prove they are. As she left, she didn't notice the figure watching from the corner office across the hall. Victoria Hale, elegant in crimson silk, her lips curling into a smile sharp enough to draw blood. She had known Adrian for years longer than this Clara Lee had been on his radar, and she had no intention of letting anyone else wedge their way into his life. Clara's days quickly became consumed by Storm Enterprises. She was given access to the company's archives, its public relations team, and even private board minutes that most outsiders would never see. The deeper she dove, the clearer it became. Adrian Storm was not just a businessman. He was a survivor. She pieced together clippings and reports, a patchwork of headlines that painted him as ruthless, brilliant, sometimes reckless, always untouchable. But none of it explained the shadows she saw in his eyes. One night, long after the office lights had dimmed, she lingered in the glass tower, studying old photographs of Adrian's earlier ventures. In one, he stood beside a younger man, his brother, according to the caption. Ethan Storm, dead now, from an accident no one ever spoke about. Clara traced the photo with her finger, wondering what kind of pain lay behind Adrian's silence. Working late. She nearly jumped. Adrian's reflection appeared in the glass behind her, his expression unreadable. I wanted to understand the company's foundation, Clara said quickly, and you think you'll find it in photographs. Sometimes pictures tell stories, reports never will. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually open up, let her glimpse whatever ghosts haunted him. Instead, he changed the subject. You shouldn't stay here alone. This city has teeth. I can handle myself, she replied, though her pulse quickened. Adrian studied her for a beat longer, then simply nodded. I don't doubt that. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Because Clara caught something in almost imperceptible softness in his voice when he said those words, and for reasons she couldn't name, it left her unsettled long after he walked away. Meanwhile, Victoria Hale began weaving her net. She approached Clara one afternoon, her smile perfectly polite, her tone dripping with honey. You must be the famous Clara Lee, Victoria said, extending a manicured hand. Adrian speaks so highly of you. Clara shook her hand cautiously. That's kind of him. Victoria's eyes glittered. Oh, Adrian is kind to many people, but don't mistake kindness for permanence. People drift in and out of his life like seasons. I'd hate to see you caught in a storm you're not prepared for. The warning was delivered with the precision of a dagger wrapped in silk. Clara smiled back, unflinching. Thank you for the concern, but I don't plan on drifting anywhere. For the briefest moment, Victoria's expression tightened before she recovered her poise. She excused herself, but Clara knew then, whatever her role had been in Adrian's past, Victoria intended to be part of his future, and Clara had just been marked as an obstacle. Over the next few weeks, Clara and Adrian worked closely. Too closely. She told herself it was strictly professional, but late nights in his office blurred lines she hadn't expected. They debated branding strategies, redesigned campaigns, and sometimes, when the city lights burned against the glass, they simply sat in silence to people, tethered by unspoken things. Adrian rarely spoke of himself, but Clara noticed details. The way his hand tightened when someone mentioned his family. The fact he never wore a wedding band, though rumors often tied him to powerful women. The subtle exhaustion in his eyes after board meetings, as if he carried not just a company, but a world on his shoulders. She also noticed how he began to rely on her, not just for her professional insights, but for her presence. He would ask for her opinion even when it wasn't necessary. He would linger after meetings, as though reluctant to let her leave, and Clara, despite every warning in her head, felt herself drawn in. One evening, while reviewing drafts for a rebranding proposal, Clara's phone buzzed with a message from her best friend. "Careful, Clara. Men like Adrian Storm don't give their hearts. They collect them." She stared at the words, uneasy. Was she being reckless? Adrian's voice interrupted her thoughts. Something wrong? She looked up, finding him watching her with that steady, storm-dark gaze. And instead of lying, she admitted softly, "I don't know what I'm doing here." His brow furrowed. "Here in this office, or here with me." Her breath caught. She hadn't meant to say it aloud. Adrian rose from behind his desk, closing the distance between them. He didn't touch her, didn't even lean close. But his presence alone was enough to make her pulse race. "You're here because you're the only one who isn't afraid to tell me the truth," he said quietly. "And I don't know what that means yet, but I know I don't want you to stop." The admission hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Clara swallowed, forcing herself to break the tension. "Careful, Adrian. People might think you actually have a heart." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Maybe I do. I just don't know if it still works." In that moment, Clara saw past the empire, past the headlines. She saw a man fractured by secrets, a man who had built walls, not to keep others out, but to keep himself from crumbling. And she realized, with a mix of fear and inevitability, that she was already too close to walk away from across the city. Victoria Hale sipped her wine in a penthouse suite, eyes fixed on the glowing Storm Enterprises tower. Her voice curled with venom as she whispered to herself, "Enjoy your moment, Clara Lee. It won't last." Because the secrets Adrian carried weren't just shadows, they were weapons. And Victoria knew exactly how to use them. Clara had always thought she understood ambition. She had chased it through internships, through sleepless nights, building campaigns for clients who rarely remembered her name, through the quiet hunger that drove her when bills piled up and dreams seemed out of reach. But ambition at Storm Enterprises was something else entirely. It wasn't hunger, it was survival. From the moment she signed her contract, Clara's days blurred into a relentless rhythm. The glass tower on Fifth Avenue became both battlefield and prison. Its reflective walls, a reminder that everyone here was watched, measured, tested. She arrived before dawn, long before most of the city had wiped the sleep from its eyes, and often left long after midnight, when cab drivers asked if she was coming from Wall Street or a hospital shift. At the center of it all was Adrian Storm. Clara quickly learned that working for Adrian meant existing in his gravitational pull. He didn't just demand excellence, he demanded truth, stripped of excuses. In meetings, he would cut through rehearsed pitches with one sharp question, forcing her to dig deeper. He dismissed easy answers but rewarded courage, even when it contradicted him. He was ruthless, but never careless. And somehow, impossibly, Clara found herself craving his approval. She told herself it was professional. That was the lie she clung to as she sat across from him one late night, the city glittering outside his office. Papers littered the desk, coffee gone cold, but Adrian remained precise. His tie still knotted, his focus undimmed. Clara, on the other hand, felt frayed at the edges. Her blazer abandoned hours ago. Her heels kicked off beneath the desk. "You're pushing the narrative too softly," Adrian said, eyes scanning the mock-ups she had presented. "Storm Enterprises isn't a company that whispers. We command." Clara pinched the bridge of her nose. "Commanding is one thing. Shouting is another. Right now, the public sees you as untouchable, cold. If we want them to believe in Storm Enterprises, we need to humanize you." His gaze flicked up, sharp as glass. "Humanize me," she swallowed. "Show them the man behind the empire. The resilience, the story, the vision. People invest in people as much as they invest in numbers." For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence pressed heavy, and Clara wondered if she had finally pushed too far. Then, to her shock, Adrian leaned back, a faint, almost reluctant smile ghosting across his face. "You're bold, Ms. Lee," he murmured, echoing his words from their first encounter. Clara's pulse stuttered. "And you like bold." This time, the smile was deliberate. Perhaps. The air between them thickened, charged with something neither acknowledged. Clara forced herself to look away, busying her hands with the scattered papers. But the truth was undeniable. She wasn't just navigating a client relationship. She was navigating a storm. Outside the cocoon of Adrian's office, the company thrummed with constant motion. Assistants darted through corridors with armfuls of files. Analysts argued over numbers in glass-walled conference rooms, and interns clutched coffee trays like lifelines. To Clara, it felt like stepping inside a machine designed to churn out both profit and pressure. She noticed how employees spoke about Adrian with a mixture of fear and reverence. "He doesn't tolerate mistakes," one whispered in the break room, "but if you survive his scrutiny, you'll be unstoppable." Another confided, "He built this company from ashes. People forget how much he's lost." The last line stuck with her. Lost. Clara had seen the photographs. In the company archives, Adrian, alongside a younger man, his brother Ethan, smiling, alive. Now, only Adrian remained, and he never spoke of Ethan, not once. That night, Clara lingered in the office, flipping through press clippings. Articles praised Adrian's brilliance, but hinted at shadows. Business rivals crushed overnight. Sudden acquisitions that raised eyebrows, and that ever-present silence about his personal life. No scandals, just a void where most men had histories. She was still staring at a photo of Adrian cutting the ribbon on a skyscraper when his reflection appeared in the glass behind her. "Working late?" he asked, his voice low. Clara jumped, clutching the file. "I was just trying to understand the story behind the empire. And what have you found?" She hesitated. "That it's not built on numbers. It's built on a man who never lets anyone close enough to know him." For a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. Then he stepped closer, the city lights framing him in silver. "And you think you can change that?" Clara's throat went dry. Maybe not, but maybe the world deserves to see the truth. Adrian's expression hardened. The world doesn't deserve anything. It takes, it consumes, and when it's finished, it spits you out. The bitterness in his tone startled her. She wanted to ask what had made him so certain, but before she could, he added quietly, "Be careful, Clara. Some truths are heavier than you think." He left her then, his footsteps fading down the hall, leaving Clara staring at the skyline. She should have been afraid. Instead, she felt a strange pull toward the man. Toward the storm, toward the secrets she wasn't sure she was ready to uncover. From a penthouse across the city, another pair of eyes watched the same skyline. Victoria Hale leaned against her balcony, silk robe fluttering in the night breeze. Her phone buzzed with the latest alerts. Storm Enterprises trending, Adrian's name climbing search engines. Clara Lee's profile suddenly elevated as the new face of his PR campaign. Victoria sipped her wine, lips curling. So she thinks she can play savior, she murmured. Adrian may let her circle close, but storms always consume. She tapped out a message to a contact in the financial press. A carefully chosen rumor. Nothing concrete, just enough to spark doubt. By morning, it would spread like wildfire, and Clara, poor Clara, would discover just how unforgiving Adrian's world could be. By the next morning, the storm had broken. Clara arrived at Storm Enterprises to find the lobby in chaos. Reporters crowded the glass doors, their shouted questions muffled by security guards in dark suits. Inside, assistants clutched phones to their ears, voices frantic as they relayed updates. Screens on the walls scrolled with headlines that seemed to multiply by the hour. Storm Enterprises under fire. Tax evasion allegations shake financial district. Adrian Storm, silent as investors. Demand answers. Empire in question. Is the storm too big to fall? Clara's stomach dropped. She had expected whispers. This was a wildfire by the time she reached the 25th floor. Her phone was buzzing non-stop. Journalists she knew personally, clients from her old agency, even her mother asking if she was safe. Everyone wanted to know what Adrian Storm had to say, but Adrian Storm wasn't talking. He was in his office, jacket off, hands braced against the edge of his desk as he read the scrolling feeds on a large monitor. His face was carved from stone. "You've seen it," he said flatly when Clara entered. "Everyone has," she replied. Fighting to steady her voice, he turned to her, eyes dark and unyielding. "Then fix it." Clara blinked. "Fix it? Adrian, this isn't a typo in a press release. These are serious allegations. Investors will demand proof. They'll get nothing," he snapped. Storm Enterprises doesn't beg for approval. Clara's pulse spiked. This isn't about begging. This is about survival. Right now, perception is bleeding you dry. If you stay silent, you're letting them decide your story. For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. His jaw tightened, his knuckles white on the desk. Then, with a clipped motion, he gestured for her to sit. "You'll have access to what you need," he said finally. "But understand this, dig too deep, and you may not like what you find." The warning sliced through her. She wanted to ask what he meant, but there was no time. The phones wouldn't stop ringing, the headlines wouldn't stop multiplying. She sat, opened her laptop, and began to build a wall of fire against the rumors. The next 72 hours blurred into one unbroken stretch of adrenaline. Clara barely left the building. She coordinated with the PR team, drafted holding statements, and fielded interview requests. She arranged a press briefing, carefully coaching Adrian's top executives to deliver steady reassurances. But the questions kept coming. Were there offshore accounts? Hidden shell companies? Did Adrian Storm use his empire to dodge billions in taxes? At night, when the building emptied, Clara remained. Her heels kicked off beneath her desk, her hair pulled into a messy knot. She combed through financial audits, highlighted patterns, searched for anything that could reassure investors. Adrian had given her access to select documents, just enough to build a defense, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was still holding something back. One evening, long after midnight, she found him still in his office. Lights low, tie loosened. He looked less like the man on magazine covers, and more like someone carrying the weight of a world no one else could see. "You're holding everything together," he said quietly as she entered. Clara gave a tired laugh. "Barely." "No." He shook his head. "You're stronger than you think. Stronger than I expected." The words caught her off guard. She wanted to believe him, but part of her bristled. "Then tell me the truth, Adrian. Are the accusations false?" His eyes darkened. He looked away, out toward the glittering skyline. "They'll never prove anything. It wasn't denial. It wasn't even reassurance. It was something else, something that made her chest tighten with unease. Before she could press, his phone buzzed. He answered sharply, voice clipped and low, full of words she couldn't fully catch. Deadlines, numbers, warnings. When he hung up, she said softly, "That didn't sound like business." "It's business, you don't need to know," he replied. "Then maybe you shouldn't make me the face of your defense," she shot back. His gaze snapped to hers. For a moment, silence roared louder than any storm. Then, softer than she expected, he said, "Maybe I shouldn't." The air between them burned, charged with tension neither of them dared name. Clara looked away first, heart pounding, and returned to her desk. But long after, the echo of his words lingered. Meanwhile, across town, Victoria Hale watched it all unfold with satisfaction. She sat in a private lounge, draped in velvet, screens glowing with the latest headlines. Investors were nervous, the stock price wobbling, and Clara Lee's name was suddenly in every article as Adrian's trusted strategist. "Perfect," Victoria murmured, swirling her wine. "Let the little savior burn herself out. Adrian will always choose power over sentiment, and when he does, she'll be nothing but ash." She tapped her phone, sending another message to her contact in the financial press. The seed had been planted. Now it only needed to grow. And when the cracks in Adrian's empire widened, Victoria intended to be the one standing at his side. Clara had always been comfortable in front of an audience, but this was different. Standing at the podium in Storm Enterprises' marble-lined atrium, facing a sea of cameras and flashing lights, she felt the weight of more than her own reputation. Every word she spoke now reflected on Adrian Storm, on his empire, on whether the stock would hold or plummet. Storm Enterprises remains fully compliant with all tax and financial regulations, she said firmly, the words crisp and clear. Our legal and financial teams are confident that these allegations are baseless. We will continue to operate with transparency and strength. This company is built on resilience, and resilience will guide us through. Questions flew from every corner. Is Adrian Storm hiding assets overseas? Why hasn't he spoken publicly? Does his silence confirm guilt? Clara's heart pounded, but she met each question with measured calm. Mr. Storm has chosen to focus on running the company during this time. As his representative, I can assure you, he has nothing to hide. Her voice didn't waver. But when the briefing ended and the cameras shut off, she nearly collapsed with the tension. She turned, and there was Adrian, standing at the edge of the crowd, expression unreadable. Later, in the quiet of his office, he poured her a glass of water and handed it to her without a word. "You didn't have to watch," Clara said, her throat dry. "I did," he replied simply. "I needed to see how you carried the storm." And Adrian studied her, the intensity of his gaze both unsettling and strangely grounding. "You carried it better than most men I've trusted." The compliment hit harder than it should have. Clara set the glass down, fingers trembling. "Then let me carry it with the truth, Adrian. Are these allegations false?" His jaw clenched. "The world doesn't deserve the truth." Her frustration boiled over. "It's not about what the world deserves. It's about whether I can trust the man I'm standing in front of cameras for every day." For a moment, silence roared between them. Adrian's eyes darkened, his expression shifting from guarded to something almost raw. He stepped closer, so close she felt the heat of him, the storm in him. "You think trust is simple," he said, voice low. "Trust is a currency, Clara. Spent too freely, it destroys you." Her chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all she could do was whisper. "Then maybe you've already spent too much." The air between them burned. Neither moved, neither spoke. And then, just as quickly, Adrian stepped back, walls slamming back into place. "Go home, Clara," he said softly, though the command was final. Rest while you can. She wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She gathered her things and left, though every step away from his office felt heavier than the last. That night, Adrian remained in his office long after the building had emptied. The city glowed outside, but he barely saw it. His mind replayed Clara's words, her voice shaking not with fear, but with defiance. She was different. She wasn't afraid of him, or at least she pretended not to be, and that terrified him. Adrian Storm had built an empire by burying his ghosts, by ensuring no one got close enough to see the fractures beneath the surface. Clara Lee was getting too close, and if she kept pushing, she might uncover truths that couldn't be contained by press statements or clever campaigns. He poured himself a drink, staring into the amber liquid. For years, this had been enough money, power, silence. But as he thought of Clara standing in front of flashing cameras, defending him with a fire she didn't have to give, he realized with a sharp pang that maybe silence was no longer enough. Across the city, Victoria Hale reclined on a velvet chaise, the glow of her phone illuminating her face. She scrolled through the latest coverage, her smile widening at every mention of Clara's name. Clara Lee, the mystery strategist, the unexpected defender of Adrian Storm. "Enjoy your spotlight," Victoria whispered, eyes gleaming. "The higher you climb, the harder the fall." She reached for her notebook, flipping to a page marked with neat, ruthless handwriting. Phase 1 had worked. The empire was rattled. Investors were wary. Adrian's name was linked to scandal in every search bar. But Phase 2 would cut deeper. Victoria tapped her pen against the page, already drafting the next rumor, already plotting the next move. Adrian might have survived the first crack, but she knew where the real fault lines lay, and when she struck again, neither Adrian Storm nor Clara Lee would walk away unscathed. The first wave had been brutal, but Storm Enterprises weathered it. Investors, rattled at first, slowly steadied as Clara's relentless press strategy restored confidence. The company's stock stopped its free fall. The media cycle moved on to fresher scandals. For a brief moment, it almost felt like the storm had passed. Almost, because shadows lingered in the corners, waiting for the next crack to widen. Victoria Hale knew it. Sitting in her penthouse one rainy evening, she watched a news coverage flicker across her television. Clara Lee's face appeared again and again, sharp in a navy suit, defending Adrian Storm with poise that would have impressed Victoria if it hadn't infuriated her. "She thinks she's indispensable," Victoria murmured, sipping her wine. "But Adrian doesn't keep people. He uses them, and I'll make sure she learns that." She picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized weeks ago. "It's time," she said when the voice answered. "The files. The ones locked behind Adrian's walls. I want them." The voice chuckled. "Risky if he finds out. He won't." Victoria cut in sharply. "And if he does, you'll be far away by then. I'll make sure of it." She hung up, satisfied. The first blow had rattled the empire. The second would gut it from the inside. Clara noticed the shift before anyone else did. It began with a missing file. Nothing major, just a quarterly report that wasn't where it should have been. She assumed it was an oversight. But then there was another, and another. Documents she'd reviewed days earlier vanished from the system. When she asked the IT team, they shrugged. Probably a glitch. Clara didn't believe in glitches. Not here. Late one night, she sat at her desk, cross-referencing printed reports with digital records. The numbers didn't match. Transactions disappeared between versions. Audits were incomplete. It wasn't a glitch, it was sabotaged. Her stomach tightened. Someone was trying to dig beneath Storm Enterprises' surface, and they were covering their tracks too well for it to be random. She needed to tell Adrian the next morning. She found him in his office, sleeves rolled up, his tie abandoned on the desk. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Adrian," she began carefully, laying the mismatched reports on his desk. There's something wrong. Files are disappearing. Numbers are shifting. I think someone inside is tampering with your records. He scanned the pages, expression darkening. You're sure? Positive. This isn't human error. Someone's doing this on purpose? For a moment, Adrian said nothing. His jaw clenched, his gaze burning into the papers. Then he stood abruptly, striding toward the window. I knew this was coming, he muttered. Clara frowned. You knew? Not who, but how. Every empire has traitors. He turned, eyes storm gray and unflinching. Find out who. Clara blinked. You want me to investigate? You're the only one I can trust. The words hit harder than they should have. But Clara steadied herself. Then I'll start with access logs, system records, employee files. Whoever's behind this left footprints, I'll find them. Adrian nodded once. Good. And Clara, his voice dropped, quieter. Be careful. This isn't a game. The deeper Clara dug, the more uneasy she became. Access logs had been wiped. Employee accounts were used at odd hours. Security footage had gaps exactly when files disappeared. It was meticulous, professional. Whoever was behind it knew exactly how to cover their tracks. But Clara also knew patterns. She'd built campaigns by spotting the smallest inconsistencies, and this was no different. Slowly, piece by piece, she traced the activity back to a single department: finance. One night, combing through the records, she found something else, something that made her blood run cold. Buried among the manipulated files was a folder marked with a date 7 years ago. Inside, incomplete transactions linked to offshore accounts, flagged and then buried. She stared at the screen, her pulse racing. The files looked real, too real, and if they were, then maybe the rumors hadn't been rumors after all. Her first instinct was to confront Adrian, her second was to protect him. Torn between them, she closed the file, heart pounding. Adrian noticed her hesitation. That evening, as she left his office, he called after her. Clara. She turned, startled. He stood by his desk, jacket draped over a chair, the skyline behind him glowing like fire. You've found something, he said. Not a question, a certainty. Her throat tightened. I've found gaps, holes in the system. Someone's tampering, Adrian, but I don't know how deep it goes yet. He studied her, eyes unreadable. And if it goes deeper than you want it to? Clara held his gaze, even as her stomach twisted. Then I'll still find the truth. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Adrian gave the faintest nod. You're bold. You like bold, she whispered before she could stop herself. The corner of his mouth twitched, but there was no humor in it, only something darker. Sometimes. She left quickly, her pulse racing. She hated that part of her craved his approval. She hated that she cared what his truth might be. But most of all, she hated that she was starting to wonder if Adrian Storm was the man she believed he was, or if he was the Storm everyone warned her about, far away. Victoria received a message on her phone. The files are in motion. She smiled, satisfaction curling through her. Perfect, she whispered. The first cracks had appeared. Now the empire would bleed from within, and when it did, Clara Lee would learn the truth. You don't stand in the storm, you drown in it. Clara hadn't slept properly in days. Coffee cups littered her desk, her eyes red-rimmed from nights spent staring at glowing screens. She traced digital footprints, ran comparisons, and cross-checked records until lines blurred into one another. But persistence paid off. Patterns emerged. Every anomaly connected back to one user profile, an accountant in the finance division named Harold Knox. On paper, he was average, mid-level, unremarkable, never late on reports. Too perfect. Clara dug deeper. Harold had accessed files far beyond his clearance. Audit trails showed his account, logging in at 3 a.m., when no legitimate business happened. But the man wasn't foolish. His digital fingerprints were faint, designed to vanish if anyone looked casually. Clara only noticed because she didn't stop at casual. Still, something didn't sit right. Why would a mid-level employee risk everything for a scheme this dangerous? Unless he wasn't acting alone. She decided to confront Adrian. Carefully, late afternoon sunlight streamed through his office windows, gilding the edges of his desk. Adrian leaned back in his chair, jacket gone, tie loosened. He looked tired, but the kind of tired that carried steel underneath like a general waiting for the next battle. "I have a name," Clara said, dropping a file onto his desk. He flipped it open, scanning. Harold Knox. His account accessed restricted financial data, repeatedly. I traced the anomalies back to him. Adrian's jaw tightened. "I've seen his file. He's clean, that's the point." To clean. Clara met his eyes, steady. No one's perfect. Adrian. His record was curated to look invisible. That's exactly what you'd do if you were covering tracks. Adrian studied her for a long beat. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "What do you want me to do?" Clara hesitated. "Let me talk to him." He barked a laugh, sharp. "Interrogate my own employee. That won't go unnoticed. Then let me approach it discreetly. Casual conversation. Questions only he would trip over if he's hiding something." Adrian tilted his head, studying her. "You're bold again." Clara folded her arms. "You keep saying that like it's a flaw." He almost smiled. Almost. Maybe it isn't. That evening, Clara staged her approach. She found Harold in the break room, pouring coffee with jittery hands. "Long week?" she asked. Casual. He startled, nearly spilling. "Ms. Lee, Huss?" "Very busy. Storm Enterprises tends to keep everyone busy," Clara said lightly. "Especially in finance. You deal with sensitive accounts, don't you?" His eyes flickered, just for a second. I handles standard reports. Nothing sensitive." Clara tilted her head. "Funny, because I saw your name linked to executive-level accounts." Harold froze. His smile faltered. "That must be a mistake." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Was it a mistake when you logged in at 3A.M? Or when files vanished right after your access? Which mistake should I report first?" Sweat beaded his forehead. He glanced toward the door, panicked. I don't know what you're talking about." "Then you won't mind if Adrian hears this," Clara said softly, straightening. His face drained of color. "No, please. Don't. You don't understand." "Then help me understand," Clara pressed. But Harold shook his head violently. "It's bigger than you think. You'll get hurt." And before she could push further, he bolted from the room, leaving his coffee untouched. Clara's pulse raced. She had confirmation, but she also had more questions than answers. That night, Clara replayed the conversation again and again. Harold was hiding something that scared him enough to panic at the mention of Adrian's name, which meant someone else was pulling strings. She didn't have to guess long. Victoria. The name burned in her mind. Clara had seen Victoria Hale circling Adrian at events, always smiling, always watching. She knew enough about powerful women to recognize ambition when she saw it. Victoria wasn't after friendship. She was after Adrian and his empire. But what Clara didn't understand was why Adrian let Victoria orbit so close. Did he trust her? Or did he tolerate her because of old debts? Either way, Clara felt a chill. If Victoria was orchestrating this, she wasn't playing games. Meanwhile, Adrian felt the empire tightening around him. At a board meeting the next morning, whispers spread like wildfire. Data leaks, financial irregularities, shareholder unease. Though nothing concrete had surfaced publicly, suspicion alone was enough to shake foundations. After the meeting, Adrian lingered in the empty conference room, fists clenched against the polished table. Clara entered quietly, watching him for a moment before speaking. "They're restless," she said. "They smell blood." He replied flatly. Clara stepped closer. "Then we don't give them more reason. We control the narrative before anyone else does." He glanced at her, eyes shadowed. "You sound like you've done this before." "I've built careers on controlling narratives," she reminded him, "and I'm not about to let yours unravel now." For a moment, his expression softened. "Why do you care so much?" The question hit like an arrow. Clara swallowed. "Because the truth matters. And because—" She trailed off, catching herself. "Because," Adrian pressed. "Because I don't believe you're the man they whisper about," she finished firmly. He held her gaze, something unspoken flickering between them. Then he nodded, the mask sliding back into place. "Then prove it." Clara left his office with her chest tight. She didn't need to admit the rest out loud, that somewhere between chasing files and battling rumors, she'd started to care about more than the truth. She cared about him, and that terrified her more than Victoria Hale ever could. Far across town, Victoria sat in a dimly lit lounge, Harold Knox opposite her. His hands trembled as he nursed a drink. "She knows," he whispered. "Clara Lee, she's on to me." Victoria's smile was sharp, predatory. "Then let her be. Curiosity can be a dangerous thing. Sooner or later, she'll stumble into something she can't handle. And when she does—" She raised her glass, eyes glittering. "Adrian will be too busy saving her to notice everything else I've taken from him." Harold swallowed hard. Dread etched on his face. But he didn't walk away. He could. And single quotes to Victoria had already bought his silence and his soul. Clara woke before dawn, the city still wrapped in silence. She couldn't shake Harold's warning. "It's bigger than you think. You'll get hurt." The words looped through her head like a broken record. She poured herself a cup of stale coffee, opened her laptop, and pulled up Harold's digital trail again. There had to be some thread she hadn't pulled yet. That's when she saw it. Encrypted transfers routed through offshore accounts. Not massive sums, but regular, frequent enough to suggest a pattern. Each transaction ended at a shell company that, on paper, had nothing to do with Storm Enterprises. But Clara had worked in marketing long enough to know the signs of a cover-up, and when she dug deeper, her stomach dropped. The shell company listed its chairperson as Victoria Hale. Later that morning, Clara stormed into Adrian's office, papers clutched in her hands. He looked up from his desk, startled by the intensity in her eyes. "You need to see this," she said, dropping the printouts in front of him. He skimmed the lines, his face hardening with every page. Offshore accounts. Regular transfers. Victoria's name stamped across them like a signature of betrayal. Adrian's voice was low, dangerous. "She's funding it." Clara nodded grimly. "She's been bankrolling Harold, using him to dig into your financials, to plant irregularities. It's all her." Adrian shoved the papers aside, standing abruptly. He paced to the window, staring at the skyline, as if it might offer answers. His reflection in the glass looked carved from stone. "I should have known," he muttered. "Victoria never does anything without an angle." Clara crossed her arms. "Then why keep her close? Why give her the chance?" His jaw flexed. "Because once, a long time ago, she saved me. When my father died, when the company nearly collapsed, she pulled strings to buy me time. I owed her, or at least, I thought I did." Clara's breath caught. The admission felt raw, stripped of armor. She stepped closer, her voice softer now. "Debts don't give her the right to destroy you, or to hurt the people around you." Adrian turned, his gaze locking onto hers. "You sound like you're including yourself in that." Clara didn't flinch. "Maybe I am." For a moment, the office was silent except for the hum of the city outside. Something unspoken passed between them, heavy and electric. That evening, Adrian called Harold into his office. Clara sat quietly at his side, observing. Harold shuffled in, pale and sweating, as though he already knew the game was up. "You've been busy," Adrian said coolly, sliding the evidence across the desk. "Offshore accounts. Unauthorized access. Care to explain?" Harold stammered, his voice cracking. I didn't want to. She made me." "Victoria," Clara supplied, her tone cutting. Harold nodded miserably. "She said if I didn't, she'd ruin me. My debts, my family, she knows everything." Adrian leaned forward, his voice low, dangerous. "And you thought betraying me was the safer choice." Tears pooled in Harold's eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would go this far." Adrian's silence was more terrifying than shouting. He dismissed Harold with a wave, and the man scurried out like a ghost. When the door shut, Clara exhaled. "So it's confirmed. Victoria's pulling the strings." Adrian pressed his palms against the desk, muscles taut. "She's always played games. But this time, she's crossed a line." Clara studied him, the storm in his expression. "What are you going to do?" He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw not just a businessman, but a man fueled by rage, betrayal, and something else, resolve. "I'm going to end it," he said simply. Days blurred into a tense rhythm. Clara and Adrian worked side by side, crafting countermeasures, tracing Victoria's influence through board members, consultants, even minor staff. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Victoria wasn't just trying to tarnish Adrian's reputations, she wanted his empire. And yet, amidst the late nights and whispered strategy sessions, something shifted. One evening, as they sat in Adrian's office surrounded by files and half-empty coffee cups, Clara caught him watching her, not with suspicion or calculation, but with something gentler. "You don't give up?" he said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. "Was that supposed to be a compliment?" "It's more than that." His voice softened. "Most people walk away when the fire gets too hot. But you—" He shook his head slightly. "You stay." Clara's throat tightened. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be burned. And maybe because I see a man worth saving." For a heartbeat, the air between them felt charged, fragile. Then Adrian looked away, as if afraid of what he might say next. Meanwhile, Victoria tightened her grip. She orchestrated leaks to the press, feeding whispers about Adrian's supposed financial misconduct. Headlines flared. "Storm Empire under scrutiny." Stocks dipped, not disastrously, but enough to rattle investors. In a sleek penthouse. Victoria raised a glass of champagne, watching the news with satisfaction. "Patience," she murmured to herself. "The higher they climb, the harder they fall." But her triumph was premature. Clara and Adrian were no longer scrambling blindly. They were preparing. The turning point came when Clara discovered an overlooked email chain buried in Harold's inbox. It was a smoking gun. Victoria instructing him to fabricate irregularities, with her digital signature stamped across attachments. She printed the evidence, her hands shaking with adrenaline. When she presented it to Adrian, his expression was unreadable. He studied the papers, then slowly set them down. "This," he said, voice low, "is the nail in her coffin." Clara nodded. "But we can't go public too fast. If we strike too soon, she'll spin it. We need to control the release, make sure every piece is airtight." Adrian regarded her, pride flickering in his eyes. "You think like a general?" "Maybe I've just been learning from one," Clara replied. That night, Clara returned to her apartment, exhaustion weighing heavy. She collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed. A message. "Careful, Clara. Some secrets aren't meant to be uncovered." No name, just a number she didn't recognize. A chill ran down her spine. She looked out the window at the glittering city lights, suddenly aware of how small she was against the vast machinery of power, money, and ambition. But then the morning began with silence. the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful but heavy, like the pause before a storm. Adrian sat in his office, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the city skyline. Clara stood beside him, arms folded, the glow of her laptop illuminating her determined face. They had everything they needed. The email chain linking Victoria to Harold's sabotage, the offshore transfers, the fabricated financial irregularities, evidence strong enough to bury her. But Victoria wasn't the type to sit quietly and wait for her empire to crumble. The first blow came at dawn. Headlines flooded every news outlet. Storm Empire under federal investigation. Words like fraud, embezzlement, criminal charges blazed across screens. Reporters camped outside Storm Enterprises within hours. Microphones thrust at every passing employee. Adrian slammed the newspaper onto his desk, fury etched into every line of his face. She moved first. Clara scanned the article, her stomach twisting. This is deliberate, leaked at the perfect time, right before quarterly reports. She wants panic. She wants your shareholders to believe you're finished. She's baiting them, Adrian said, pacing. If they lose confidence, the board could force me out before I can prove anything. Clara closed her laptop with a snap. Then we don't let her control the story. We set the narrative. If we go public with our evidence now, he cut her off, sharp. If we go too soon and it isn't airtight, she twisted. She'll say, I fabricated the files to protect myself. We need timing, Adrian. Timing doesn't matter if you don't have a company left to protect, Clara shot back. Their eyes locked, the weight of the moment pressing down. Adrian exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. You're right. We move tonight. That evening, Clara prepared a media strategy with surgical precision. Drafts of statements, curated leaks, hand-picked journalists she trusted to handle the story without bias. She typed relentlessly, every keystroke carrying the weight of reputations and livelihoods. But just as she finished, her phone buzzed with an anonymous message. Walk away. Clara. Last warning. Her throat tightened. She showed Adrian the text. He read it, face darkening. She's trying to scare you. She's wasting her time, Clara said firmly. Though her fingers trembled as she pocketed the phone, Adrian stepped closer, his voice low. This isn't just corporate games anymore. Victoria plays dirty. If you stay in this, you become a target. Clara met his gaze, unwavering. I was a target the moment I chose to stand next to you, and I'm not walking away. Something flickered in his eyes, gratitude, respect, maybe even something deeper. The next day, Victoria struck again. A press conference erupted downtown. Victoria, draped in flawless white, stepped to the podium with cameras flashing like gunfire. She delivered her performance with icy poise, crocodile tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. It breaks my heart, she said, voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed, to see Storm Enterprises fall into such corruption. As someone who has long been a friend to Adrian, I can no longer stand by in silence. The people deserve the truth. She unveiled glossy folders labeled with fabricated evidence, graphs twisted, numbers doctored, signatures forged. To the untrained eye, it looked damning. The crowd gasped, flashes intensified, and within minutes, hashtags trended across social media. Hashtag storm fraud. Hashtag corporate corruption. Clara watched the broadcast from Adrian's office, bile rising in her throat. She's good, she muttered. Adrian stood behind her, face carved in stone. Too good. She's turning the public before we can even open our mouths, Clara said. Then we open them louder, Adrian replied. His voice held the weight of command, the steel of a man who refused to fall. That night, the building shook with chaos. Protesters gathered outside Storm Enterprises, chanting accusations. Investors flooded Adrian's phone with demands for explanations. Inside, board members whispered of resignation, of survival. Adrian walked into the chaos like a soldier walking onto a battlefield. His presence alone silenced the room. "Listen to me," he said, voice low but carrying. "Victoria Hale is behind this. And tomorrow morning, you'll see proof. Not rumors. Not doctored files. Proof." The room buzzed with disbelief, but his conviction cracked through the noise. Clara watched him, her chest tightening with something fierce admiration. Yes, but also fear. Because she knew that if their proof failed, Adrian would lose everything. Later, when the building emptied, Adrian and Clara remained. The city stretched out before them, lights blinking like stars against the night. Adrian leaned against his desk, shoulders heavy. "She's forcing me into a corner." Clara stepped closer, her voice steady. "Corners can be powerful places. They leave only one direction to fight forward." He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing not just an ally but the anchor he hadn't known he needed. "You always know what to say," he murmured. Clara managed a faint smile. "That's my job." For the first time in days, he smiled too, brief but real. But the storm outside wasn't over. It was only beginning. The boardroom of Storm Enterprises was designed to intimidate. High ceilings, walls of glass overlooking Manhattan, a table so long it seemed to stretch into infinity. On this morning, it felt more like a battlefield. Every seat was filled. Shareholders with tight jaws and restless hands, attorneys with folders stacked like shields, executives whispering as though the outcome of this meeting might decide their personal futures. Reporters weren't allowed inside, but everyone knew what would be said here would leak before the hour was over. Adrian entered last. He wore a navy suit, crisp and commanding, but the set of his shoulders carried a weight only Clara noticed. She followed 2 steps behind, clutching a slim folder, the evidence they had fought to piece together. The moment Adrian sat, Leonard Cole, one of the oldest board members, wasted no time. "Adrian, the stock plummeted another 4% overnight. Investors are calling for your resignation. Victoria Hale has already addressed the media with detailed accusations. If you don't act now, we may have no choice but to remove you." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Adrian didn't flinch. "You'll have my response. But first, you'll have the truth." He nodded to Clara, who connected her laptop to the screen mounted on the wall. The boardroom dimmed, the skyline muted by blinds lowering automatically. Clara's fingers flew across the keyboard until the first slide appeared, a series of emails. "These," Adrian began, his voice low but steady, "are internal communications between Victoria Hale and Harold Denton. They show explicit coordination to sabotage Storm Enterprises by fabricating financial irregularities." The room shifted uneasily. Leonard leaned forward, squinting at the text projected in sharp black letters. Clara advanced to the next slide. A spreadsheet of offshore transfers. "Funds wired from accounts controlled by Ms. Hale," she explained, her tone clinical. "2 shell companies hired to generate falsified audits." Gasps echoed around the table. Before the weight of the revelation could settle, the doors at the far end swung open. Victoria Hale entered, flanked by her lawyers. She wore cream silk and diamonds at her throat, her hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her entrance was theatrical, calculated to seize attention. "Apologies for being late," she said smoothly, as if she owned the room. "I assumed this circus wouldn't start without me." Adrian's jaw clenched, but he gestured for her to sit. "By all means, hear the evidence you've worked so hard to bury." Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Evidence? Or another one of your elaborate stories, Adrian?" Clara advanced to the next file. Recordings. The audio filled the room. Victoria's unmistakable voice discussing strategy with Harold. "Push the numbers hard enough, and Adrian will look like he's covering his own failures. Once the board loses faith, we take control." The impact was immediate. Shareholders stiffened. Attorneys scribbled notes. Victoria's smile faltered, then sharpened. Conveniently obtained, she said coolly. Who's to say this isn't doctored? After all, Adrian has every motive to fabricate. Her lawyer rose. Madam Chair, I demand this so-called evidence be independently verified before it's allowed to tarnish Ms. Hale's reputation. Chaos erupted, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Clara's pulse thundered as she scanned the room. For every shareholder looking horrified, another looked uncertain, wavering. Adrian stood, his voice cutting through the clamor. You want independent verification? Fine. These files have already been submitted to federal investigators. By tomorrow, their authenticity will be beyond question. A hush fell. It was a gamble, and everyone knew it. If Adrian was bluffing, he was finished. If not, Victoria's empire was crumbling. Victoria leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. You always did enjoy theatrics, Adrian. But the public has already decided. Hashtags don't wait for court rulings. Your name is synonymous with corruption now. By the time your so-called evidence is verified, Storm Enterprises will be ashes. Adrian's gaze was steel. Better ashes than rot. The words landed like a strike. Clara felt a chill, not from fear, but from the raw power in his conviction. Leonard broke the silence. Adrian, even if this is true, the damage is catastrophic. The question is whether you can still lead this company through it. The implication was clear. Prove not just Victoria's guilt, but his own strength. Adrian's hand brushed the folder in front of him. He opened it, spreading glossy photographs across the table. Each one showed signatures, Victoria's signatures on falsified contracts. Leadership, Adrian said, isn't about avoiding storms. It's about standing in the middle of them and not moving. You want proof? I can lead. Look around. She tried to bury me, and I'm still here. All eyes swung to Victoria. For the first time, her poise cracked. A flush rose on her neck, her manicured nails drumming against the table. She shot to her feet. This is a smear campaign. He's desperate. You can't trust. Sit down, Victoria. Leonard interrupted sharply. His voice trembled not with weakness, but with anger. Until this evidence is reviewed, you are suspended from all board activity. The words detonated like dynamite. Victoria's eyes blazed, her lawyer sputtering protests, but the tide had turned. The shareholders who minutes earlier had leaned toward doubt now whispered urgently about damage control, about survival under Adrian's continued leadership. Clara exhaled, tension loosening in her chest. They weren't safe yet, but the boardroom had shifted. Adrian had held his ground. As the meeting adjourned, Victoria stalked toward the door, her heels striking like gunshots. She paused only once, looking back at Adrian with a smile that was all venom. This isn't over, she hissed. Adrian met her gaze without flinching. It will be. When the doors closed behind her, the silence left in her wake was heavy, but charged. Clara gathered the files, her hands trembling slightly. Adrian reached over, steadying them with his. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the battlefield around them faded. You did it, she whispered. We did it, he corrected. Voice low, resolute, but even as relief threatened to surface, Clara knew the war wasn't finished. Victoria was wounded, not defeated, and wounded predators were the most dangerous. The boardroom emptied slowly, leaving behind a silence thick with the residue of conflict. Papers were scattered across the long mahogany table, the faint scent of expensive perfume lingering where Victoria had stood moments earlier. Adrian remained at the head of the table, staring at the city through the wall of glass. His reflection looked older, harsher, yet also strangely lighter. Clara gathered the folders into neat stacks, her hands steadying after the tremors of adrenaline. You should sit, she said softly. I can't, Adrian replied, his voice gravel low. Not yet. Clara hesitated, then crossed to stand beside him. For a long moment, they simply looked out at Manhattan's skyline, the jagged towers glowing in the gray of late afternoon. You did what you said you would, she whispered. You faced her. You didn't let her bury you. Adrian's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. We faced her. Don't think for a second. I could have pulled this off without you. Her chest tightened at the quiet sincerity in his tone. She'd stood beside him through chaos, through fear, through moments where doubt threatened to crush them both. And yet, here he was, giving her credit when he was the one who had stood in front of the fire. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed sharply. She frowned, pulling it from her pocket. Another anonymous message. Walk away, Clara. Last chance. Her stomach twisted. She held the phone out for Adrian to see. His expression darkened, a shadow sweeping across his features. She's not finished. I told you, she doesn't scare me, Clara said, though her pulse betrayed her words. Adrian turned fully toward her, his hand brushing her arm unintentionally, perhaps, but enough to steady her. You shouldn't have to be brave all the time. This isn't your war. Clara met his gaze squarely. Yes, it is. Because the moment I let her silence me, she wins, and I don't lose to bullies. For the first time that day, Adrian's lips curved into something real. Not a smile of victory, but of recognition, of respect. That evening, Victoria made her move. News outlets exploded with a new round of headlines. Clara Matthews under scrutiny. Grainy photographs appeared online. Clara walking into Adrian's office. Clara leaving late at night. The insinuations were clear, the hashtags cruel. Clara sat frozen at her desk as the stories flooded in. Her email inbox filled with journalists demanding comment, strangers hurling insults. She felt the walls closing in, shame and fury colliding in her chest. Adrian burst in minutes later, a tablet in hand. She's targeting you now, he said, voice tight with rage. She thinks if she can't discredit you. She dragged me down instead, Clara murmured. He set the tablet aside and crouched in front of her, his gray eyes burning with an intensity that made her forget the storm outside. Listen to me. You are not collateral damage. You are not her pawn. Tomorrow, we put an end to this for good. How? Clara whispered, by showing the world exactly who she is. The next morning, Storm Enterprises called a press conference. The atrium of the headquarters brimmed with journalists, cameras flashing like strobe lights. Protesters still lingered outside, but their chants had grown weaker. Uncertain, Adrian stepped onto the stage, Clara at his side. He looked every bit the unshakable CEO-tailored suit. Squared shoulders, but Clara, standing inches away, could feel the current of steel holding him upright. Over the last several weeks, Adrian began, his voice carrying across the room. Storm Enterprises has been under attack, not by regulators, not by market forces, but by a calculated campaign of lies. Screens behind him lit up with slides, the emails, the offshore transfers, the forged audits, each detail carefully laid out, undeniable. This campaign was orchestrated, Adrian continued, by Victoria Hale. The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Gasps, furious scribbles of pens, the click of cameras. Adrian pressed forward. She attempted to manipulate this board, this company, and the public. She fabricated evidence. She spread falsehoods. And she targeted not just me, but those who dared stand beside me. Clara's throat tightened, but she held her ground as dozens of lenses swung toward her. We have submitted this evidence to federal investigators, Adrian said, each word like a hammer. Legal proceedings are underway. Storm Enterprises will cooperate fully, and to our shareholders, our employees, and our clients, we will emerge from this stronger, because integrity always outlasts deceit. The room erupted. Journalists shouted questions, flashes blinded, but Adrian stepped back from the podium, His jaw set. He had said what needed to be said. Moments later, the press release went live online, attaching the full dossier. The reaction was immediate. Hashtags shifted. Hashtag storm fraud gave way to hashtag Hale exposed. Calls for Victoria's arrest trended within the hour. Across town, cameras caught Victoria leaving her penthouse, her face hidden behind sunglasses, her lawyers shielding her from the swarm of reporters screaming her name. The empire she had built on manipulation was collapsing brick by brick, and the world was watching. That night, Storm Enterprises headquarters finally quieted. Adrian and Clara remained in his office, the city a glittering ocean beyond the windows. The exhaustion of the last weeks settled over them both. But so too did something else. Relief. Clara sank into a chair, exhaling shakily. It's really over, isn't it? Adrian leaned against his desk, studying her. For her? Yes. For us? It's only the beginning. She glanced up, startled by the softness in his tone. Us. He crossed the room slowly, each step deliberate, as though closing the distance between them was more dangerous than any battle he'd faced. When he stopped in front of her, the hard lines of his face eased, just slightly. You stood with me when you didn't have to, he said quietly, when it would have been safer, smarter to run. You stayed. Clara's pulse quickened. I told you. I don't lose to bullies. His mouth quirked faintly. No, you don't. For a long moment, the silence stretched. The storm outside had passed, but inside, something new stirred, something fragile, terrifying, undeniable. Adrian reached down, his hand brushing hers. Not the commanding grip of a CEO, not the protective hold of a guardian, but a tentative touch. A man asking, not taking. Clara's breath caught, and then, slowly, she turned her hand, threading her fingers through his dot. The world outside still raged, particles, trials, fallout yet to come. But in that quiet office, for the first time, Adrian Carter and Clara Matthews allowed themselves not to be warriors, but simply to people who had chosen each other in the storm. The collapse of Victoria Hale's empire didn't mean peace for Storm Enterprises. If anything, the days that followed were harder. The news cycle was relentless, churning with headlines that swung between vindication and suspicion. Storm Enterprises survives coup. Adrian Carter exonerated, but can he lead? Clara Matthews, hero or opportunist? Clara scrolled through the articles on her phone one evening, curled on the edge of her couch. Every headline stung differently. The ones that praised her made her skin crawl almost as much as the ones that vilified her. It wasn't about her. She wanted to scream it. Had never been about her. She was just someone who refused to walk away. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her mother. Are you safe? Everyone keeps asking me about you. I don't know what to say anymore. Clara pressed the phone to her chest, her throat tight. She hated that her family, her friends, were dragged into the glare of a spotlight they'd never asked for at Storm Enterprises. Adrian's days blurred into a haze of back-to-back meetings. Investors demanded reassurance. Employees wanted stability. Regulators required cooperation. He moved through it all with a grim determination, his voice steady, his posture unyielding. But when the conference rooms emptied and the offices darkened, exhaustion hit him like a blow. He'd stand at the window of his top-floor office, the skyline stretching beyond, and wonder how much of himself he had left to give. One night, near midnight, Clara found him there. She had stopped by to drop off revised communication drafts for the PR team, but what she found was Adrian, alone in the half-dark, shoulders hunched, tie loose, staring at the city like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. You're still here, she said softly. He didn't turn. So are you. Clara set the papers on his desk. You can't keep this pace, Adrian. You're burning yourself out. He finally looked at her, eyes shadowed but clear. If I stop now, everything we fought for collapses. I can't let that happen. You don't have to do it alone, she countered. The words hung between them, heavy with more than just business. For the first time, Adrian let the silence stretch, his gaze lingering on her as though weighing whether to let the truth slip through. But then the phone on his desk rang, sharp and insistent. He turned away, picking it up, his voice sliding back into CEO steel. Clara stood there a moment longer, watching the armor snap back into place, before quietly leaving. The next morning brought more blows. Protesters gathered again outside headquarters. Though this time the chants weren't about Adrian's guilt, they were about his leadership. Resign. Storm needs new blood. Inside, the board convened yet another emergency meeting. Leonard Cole spoke bluntly. The public may believe Victoria's lies are exposed, but confidence in you, Adrian, is fragile. We need a strategy to prove Storm isn't just surviving, it's thriving. Adrian kept his composure, but Clara saw the flicker in his jaw. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about redemption. Afterward, she pulled him aside. You can't rebuild everything in a week. People need time to adjust. I don't have time, Adrian said flatly. Competitors are circling. Every day we wait, we bleed market share. Clara crossed her arms. Then let them circle. We can't control the sharks, but we can control the narrative. If you want to rebuild Storm, it has to start with people believing in you again. Not as a CEO in a suit, as a man. He frowned, unused to the idea. People don't care about the man. They care about the numbers. She shook her head. Not this time. Not after what happened. They need to see that you've learned. That you're more than the machine Victoria tried to paint you as. Adrian studied her, the lines around his eyes deepening. And if I don't know how to be that man, Clara's voice softened, then let me help you. That weekend, Storm Enterprises hosted an employee forum, something Clara had pushed hard for. The atrium was filled with rows of chairs. Employees of every level gathered not as subordinates, but as people desperate for answers. Adrian stood on the stage, Clara nearby. His usual speeches were numbers heavy, full of market strategies and forecasts. But tonight, he spoke differently. I know the past weeks have shaken your trust, he began, his voice lower, more human. I know some of you wondered if this company was worth standing behind. I wondered the same thing myself. The room stilled, Adrian continued, but then I looked around. I saw the people who stayed late, who kept working while the world shouted at us. I saw Clara Matthews, who refused to let lies become louder than truth. And I realized something. Storm Enterprises isn't built on one man or one board. It's built on all of us. And if we stand together, there's nothing, no scandal, no sabotage that can destroy us. Applause broke, hesitant at first, then swelling into something real. Clara felt her chest tighten. For once, he wasn't just commanding, he was connecting. Afterward, as employees clustered to shake his hand, Adrian caught Clara's eye across the room. His nod was small, but it carried more than words. You were right. Later. When the crowd had gone and the building was quiet again, Clara found him leaning against a column, exhaustion tugging at his shoulders. You did well, she said gently. He gave her a rare smile, weary but genuine. I did what you told me to. Clara shook her head. No, you did what you needed to. You let them see you. For the first time in weeks, Adrian allowed himself a breath that wasn't laced with pressure. And when his eyes met Clara's, something shifted. Not just relief, not just gratitude, something deeper, something fragile, but undeniable. Neither spoke of it then. The moment was too new, too raw. But as they walked out of the building together, the city lights washing over them, Clara knew the healing had begun, not just for Storm Enterprises, but for Adrian, and maybe, just maybe, for herself. The weeks after the employee forum brought a fragile calm. Storm Enterprises steadied itself, stock prices plateaued. Employees returned to their rhythms. The media slowly shifted its focus to fresher scandals. But inside Adrian Carter's penthouse, the calm felt like standing on the edge of something both terrifying and inevitable. Clara had stopped keeping her distance. Meetings bled into late nights into dinners, dinners into conversations that wandered past business. Sometimes she found herself still in his office at midnight, laughing at stories he told about his first disastrous pitch, or the time he got locked in a stairwell at a client's headquarters and missed an entire meeting. The moments were rare, but they chipped at the fortress of steel he carried around him. Yet, even as they drew closer, she sensed the shadow that lingered. It was in the way his eyes drifted toward the window when conversations grew too personal, in the silence that stretched when she asked about his past. He let her in, but only so far. One night, Clara found herself alone in his penthouse for the first time. She had dropped off documents, but Adrian had insisted she stay for dinner. Now, hours later, they sat on the balcony. The city a constellation of lights sprawling endlessly below. "You never stop working," she teased, nodding toward the papers he'd stacked neatly even here. Adrian smirked faintly. Occupational hazard? Silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the city. Clara turned her gaze toward him, heart thudding. "You know, you've asked me about everything my family, why I came to Storm, even what books I read, but you never talk about yourself." "Not really." He stiffened, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "There's not much worth telling." "I don't believe that," she said gently. For a long moment, she thought he might shut her out again. But then, slowly, he set his glass down, his hands clasping together as if bracing himself. "I was engaged once," he said at last, his voice low. "Her name was Elise. We met when I was 23. She was the kind of person who walked into a room and made it brighter just by existing." Clara listened, her chest tightening. "She believed in me before anyone else did," Adrian continued. "Back when Storm was just an idea, she was there pushing me, encouraging me, telling me I could build something that mattered. We planned a life together." His eyes darkened, the weight of memory pressing heavy. And then one night, she was driving home from a late shift. A drunk driver ran a red light. She never made it. Clara's breath caught. Adrian exhaled sharply, as if forcing the words free. "After that, I swore off. Everything. Love, vulnerability. I told myself it was easier to bury it all, to become someone who couldn't be hurt again. And for a while, it worked. Until you." The confession hung between them, fragile and raw. Clara's throat tightened, with a mix of sorrow and something deeper. "Adrian," she whispered. He finally looked at her, his gray eyes stripped bare. "You make me want things I thought I'd buried with her. And that terrifies me, Clara, because I don't know if I can survive losing someone again." Her chest ached. She had seen him stand unflinching against scandals, against enemies, against entire boardrooms. But here, he was vulnerable in a way that shook her to her core. Clara reached across the space between them, her hand finding his. "I can't promise you'll never lose me. Life doesn't work like that. But I can promise you this, Sim, not Elise. I'm me. And I'm here, Adrian. I'm choosing to stay." His fingers tightened around hers, as though anchoring himself. For a long time, they sat in silence, the city humming below. Two broken pieces tentatively fitting together, but healing wasn't simple. The next week, a magazine ran a feature titled "The Woman Behind Adrian Carter, Savior or Scandal." Clara's photograph filled half the page, accompanied by speculation about her relationship with him. When Clara saw it at a newsstand, her stomach dropped. The article painted her as either a hero who saved Storm or a manipulator who had replaced Victoria as Adrian's new weakness. That evening, she stormed into Adrian's office, tossing the magazine onto his desk. "Do you see this? They've turned me into a narrative, I'm not a narrative, Adrian. I'm a person. He glanced at the cover, his jaw tightening. Ignore it. They'll move on. I can't just ignore it. Clara snapped. Do you know what it's like to have strangers dissect your every move, your every word? To be reduced to someone's headline? Adrian's voice sharpened. Do you think I don't know? I've lived with it for years. Their eyes locked, the clash of frustration and hurt sparking between them. Clara's voice dropped, trembling. Then why would you let me get dragged into it? Why didn't you warn me what this would mean? For a moment, Adrian looked as though she'd struck him. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Because I was selfish. Because I didn't want to let you go, even if it meant putting you through this. The honesty cut through the anger, leaving only the raw truth. Clara swallowed hard, her voice softening. I don't need you to be perfect, Adrian. I just need you to let me decide if I can handle it. He looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted in his expression and understanding. A surrender. Then decide, he said quietly. Clara drew a deep breath, the weight of choice heavy in her chest. And yet, when she spoke, the answer felt simple. I already have. I'm not leaving. For the first time in weeks, Adrian's eyes softened, the steel melting into something warmer. He stood, closing the distance between them, his hand brushing her cheek. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for, he murmured. Clara managed a small smile, her eyes bright. And you're softer than you pretend to be. The tension broke, replaced by a quiet certainty. The storm wasn't over. There would always be scrutiny, headlines, whispers. But they had faced the worst and still chosen each other. And that, Clara realized, was the beginning of healing. Spring came early that year, washing New York in soft light and cool breezes that hinted at renewal. For Storm Enterprises, renewal was exactly what they needed. The investigation into Victoria Hale dominated headlines for weeks. Each court appearance, each leaked document, drove home her downfall. The woman who once strutted into boardrooms like she owned them now appeared in grainy photographs, leaving court in sunglasses. Her empire dismantled piece by piece. Adrian refused to gloat. Whenever reporters asked for comment, he gave the same measured response. Storm Enterprises is focused on rebuilding trust. That's where my attention lies. And rebuild he did. Clara was there every step, shaping communications, aligning teams, guiding employees through the turbulence. Her quiet strength anchored not only Adrian but the hundreds of people who looked to him for leadership. At first, Adrian worried about the spotlight on her. The speculation about their relationship hadn't faded. Tabloids still tried to spin her into whatever narrative sold best. But as weeks passed, Clara surprised him and herself. She stopped flinching when cameras caught her leaving the building. She spoke at small internal gatherings with confidence, even humor. When an article mocked her background, she framed it and hung it on her office wall with the caption, "Try harder." Adrian admired her resilience more than he could say. One evening, Storm hosted a charity gala at the Whitney Museum. It was the first time the company had appeared so publicly since the chaos. The board insisted Adrian attend with a united front, though what they truly wanted was reassurance that Storm was whole again. Adrian dreaded the event. But when Clara appeared in a sleek black gown, her hair swept into soft waves, his dread eased. She was radiant, not in a way that screamed for attention, but in a way that made the noise around her fall quiet. They entered together, cameras flashing like wildfire. Whispers rose. Immediately, there she is. That's her. Adrian Carter's Clara. Adrian leaned down, his voice low enough only for her. Ignore them. I'm fine, she murmured, squeezing his arm. And she was. Inside, the gala unfolded with champagne and speeches. Adrian delivered a brief address about integrity, innovation, and resilience. But when he stepped off the stage, it wasn't the applause that lingered with him, it was the sight of Clara. smiling up at him with quiet pride. Later that night, on the museum's rooftop terrace, away from the crowd, Adrian finally let himself exhale. The city glittered around them, alive and restless. "You handled tonight better than I did," he admitted. Clara arched a brow. "You think I haven't learned a thing from you? I've had a very strict teacher." He chuckled, then turned serious. "This, all of it, I couldn't have done it without you. You would have found a way," she said. "No," he replied firmly. "I wouldn't have. Not like this." The vulnerability in his tone silenced her. She searched his face, finding none of the steel mask he wore in public. For once, he was just a man, standing under the stars, asking for nothing but to be seen. "Adrian," she began, but he cut her off gently. "I don't want to hide anymore, Clara. Not from the board, not from the press, not from myself. The truth is, I love you, and I don't care who knows it." Her breath caught. The words hung in the cool night air, unguarded and undeniable. She had imagined hearing them, but never like this, so simple, so certain. Tears pricked her eyes as she whispered, "I love you too." Adrian smiled, rare and unrestrained, before pulling her into his arms. For the first time in years, the weight he carried seemed lighter, replaced by something fierce and freeing. The weeks that followed felt different. Storm's reputation climbed steadily, investors returned, employees thrived under new initiatives. Adrian implemented programs Clara had encouraged, ones that focused on people as much as profits. Clara, meanwhile, found herself carving a new space in the company, not as the shadow behind Adrian, but as a voice in her own right. She spoke at industry panels, sometimes with him, sometimes alone, and though the press still linked her name to his, she learned to smile through it, because the truth was simple. They were linked, and she wouldn't trade it. Months later, Clara stood at the ribbon cutting of a new Storm initiative, a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs. Adrian stood beside her, scissors in hand, but when the ribbon fell, he leaned close and whispered, "This was your idea. Take the credit." She laughed softly. "Since when do CEOs share credit?" "Since one taught me what leadership really means," he replied. The cameras flashed, capturing their smiles. To the world, it was a corporate victory. To Clara, it was proof of something more, that she had become part of a future she once thought impossible. That night, back at the penthouse, they curled on the couch with takeout containers scattered around. Clara leaned against Adrian, content in the quiet. "You know," she teased, "you're a lot less terrifying when you're eating lo mein in sweatpants." Adrian smirked. "Don't tell the board. I have a reputation to uphold." She laughed, then grew serious. "Do you ever think about what Elise would say about all of this?" Adrian's eyes softened. "All the time. And I think she'd tell me to stop punishing myself, to live, to love again." Clara's throat tightened. She cupped his cheek gently, then listened to her. He kissed her then, slow and certain, as the city hummed beyond their windows. By summer, Storm Enterprises was stronger than ever. Victoria Hale faced sentencing, her name now synonymous with betrayal. Adrian Carter's name, once threatened with ruin, became tied instead to resilience and redemption. And through it all, Clara remained at his side, not as a shadow, not as a scandal, but as a partner. One evening, at a private dinner with close friends and colleagues, Adrian stood to make a toast. "To Storm Enterprises," he said, raising his glass. "To integrity, to second chances, and to the people who remind us why we fight for them." He turned toward Clara, his eyes unwavering. "To the woman who gave me mine." The room erupted in applause, but Clara barely heard it. Her heart was too full, her gaze locked on his dot, as glasses clinked and laughter filled the air. Clara realized the storm that had nearly broken them had instead remade them, stronger, braver, together.